Thank you for coming out, and I know this is like really exciting topic, but I'm guessing that most of you are here because you have either not done a FAFSA for a while or you've never done one, or else you just like to come to financial aid talks. Okay, so tonight, what we hope to kind of cover for you are just some things that you're going to need to know as your student goes into college, or if you are the student as you go into college. Sorry, I thought I had moved this. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is what financial aid is. The cost of attendance. So how we come up with those numbers, the expected family contribution, financial need, categories, types, and sources of financial aid, the free application for federal student aid, and special circumstances. So can anybody tell me, I know I'm like going to put you on the spot here, what you think financial aid is? Okay, I know, it's like so exciting. Okay, well, since no one wants to volunteer, financial aid consists of funds provided to the student and their families to help pay for post-secondary educational expenses. This can include things like scholarships, grants, WorkStudy, and also loans. Okay. So the cost of attendance are the direct and indirect costs that we put together. It's usually an estimate, but we take those numbers and we put them together very strategically so that we can get very close to what the cost of attendance actually will be for your students. So we try very hard not to go over the amount that it might actually cost them to go to school for a year. Some of those things, the direct costs would be the tuition and fees, other expenses like their books and supplies at some schools. Now, as far as our school, we don't actually put that on their bill, but if you would see those costs on their bill, those would be their direct costs. So the room and board, tuition and fees, and at some schools, books and supplies would also be included. However, transportation and personal expenses and miscellaneous items would also be included in that cost of attendance, because we know that it costs more than just books and supplies and tuition and fees to go to school for a year. Sometimes you're going to want to go home and it's going to cost, now for you, it's, you know, your students are here, they're probably not having to drive very far to get home, but if they're living at home, we also factor in how far does it, you know, how much does it take for them to get across town. So those would be the indirect costs. We also factor in things like shampoo and jeans and things that they're going to need during the year. The cost of attendance is going to vary from college to college, and this is going to depend on what type of institution they're going to. So if they're going to an Ivy League school, their cost of attendance is going to be very high. If they're going to a community college or a tech school, those costs are probably going to be much more reasonable and lower cost for the student. Expected family contribution is the amount of money that the government says is the family's responsibility to come up with to help the student go to school. Basically, the government says that it is really the family's responsibility to put the student through school. When they come up with the calculations for how much they are going to contribute, it's always based on the family's need. And so so the expected family contribution is put together based on the numbers that they get off of the FAFSA, and that's why when you complete that, you're answering things like how much does your family make, and how many people are in the household, and what were your taxes and which state did you live in, and those all factor into the expected family contribution. This number stays the same regardless of what institution you go to. So if you go to a higher cost school, your expected family contribution is going to stay the same as if you went to or if you went to a lower cost school, and that's going to determine what your need is going to be, because to come up with financial need, the schools have to take what the cost of attendance is at that school, and they subtract your expected family contribution, and that determines your need at that school. And so you can see that if, for instance, in number 1, you were going to a more high-cost school, the expected family contribution is going to stay the same and your need is going to be higher than if you went to a lower-cost school, number 3, where your expected family contribution is the same, and now you don't have to necessarily come up with as much to make up the difference between what it's going to cost for that year and how much you're going to need to pay. So, there are several types of financial aid. Okay. The first one is gift aid. So these are always types of aid that you do not have to pay back. So these would be scholarships, grants, anything that says grant in most cases. Now there are some types of grants, like Teach Grant, that actually are a loan. And if you don't meet a certain obligation for service at a school that's high need, or that you teach within a certain type of curriculum, so math, science, those types of things, then that money that they gave to you, which they call a grant, ends up having to be repaid. So in most cases, scholarships and grants are gift aid, but there are certain types that aren't. Also, you have self-help aid, and so these are loans and WorkStudy. A lot of times students, the reason that this is self-help aid with the WorkStudy, because you're not going to have to pay that WorkStudy money back, but you are going to have to go out and get a job. And so those are the types of aid that you are helping yourself. You are doing something. With the loans, you will be helping yourself because eventually you're going to be paying that money back. There are several sources for financial aid. So some of these include the federal government, the college or university, the state, sometimes private sources. So community, there are community organizations that will give money to students, civic organizations and churches, and also employers will sometimes give aid to students because their parent works at a certain organization or a certain employer. So, what's out there for students? Pell Grants. The Pell Grant is based on your expected family contribution. It's automatic eligibility, so you will know when you complete the FAFSA whether you're eligible for a Pell Grant, because it will say at the end that they have Pell eligibility or loan eligibility, or only loan eligibility. And in 1920, the maximum annual award for Pell was $6,195. Now, in my time in financial aid, I've seen it go up each year, and it's usually about $100 per year, but that's not necessarily a guarantee. You never know what the government's going to do, but this is somewhat what they've been doing, is about $100 a year more, so I expect that that's probably going to continue, but you just never know. SEOG. The SEOG is a type of grant, and it's a supplemental grant. So it's based on your need, and it's for the neediest students, and it only is available while there's actually money there. And so as students are doing their FAFSAs and they're coming in, we're awarding that, and once it's gone, it's gone. So it's not necessarily guaranteed like the Pell Grant. If you're Pell Grant eligible, that's guaranteed. SEOG is sort of like, it might happen or it might not. Teach Grant. So this is for those who are planning to teach in high need fields, and you have to agree to serve. Like I said, you have to go out and work in either a high needs school, or you have to work in a certain curriculum field, so math, science, and technology. And then the Kansas Comprehensive Grant. This is given by the state. It's determined by the Kansas legislature. It's available at 4-year colleges and universities only, so any 2-year colleges you won't see the Kansas Comprehensive Grant awarded, and it's based on availability. So as soon as when we have the funds, we award them, and once we're out, we're out. Okay. So federal WorkStudy. These are federal dollars paid in exchange for part-time employment in designated jobs. Now we always most everybody limits the amount of time that the student is able to work because school comes first. And so that is the understanding behind WorkStudy, is that you're supposed to focus on school, but we're going to give you a job that you could potentially earn some extra money. For us, it's usually 20 hours or less. So federal direct loans, these are loans, so anytime it says loan, it means it has to be paid back. And there are several types of direct loans. First of all is subsidized. Subsidized means that the government is paying the interest while the student is in school. So, and there's also a 6-month grace period after the student leaves school that they are allowed to try to get employment before they begin to have to pay this money back. So they are not expected to pay the money while they're in school, and after they either leave school or drop below half-time, then they go into that grace period. Also unsubsidized, so it has that same grace period and the same requirements that they have to be at least half-time. But unsubsidized loans, the government does not pay the interest. So that interest begins to accrue once they take it and it's dispersed. So after they accept it and it's dispersed, that money starts to accrue and gain interest. I always tell people it's a good idea if you're going to take unsubsidized loans to just go ahead and pay that interest about every quarter so that that doesn't actually capitalize and become a bigger loan that is now building interest off of that higher amount. So the freshman annual loan limit is $5,500. And so that kind of helps to keep those amounts down for the student so they're not over borrowing in the time that they're in school. So that first year they can borrow $5,500. Their second year, or once they get to 30 credit hours, they can borrow $6,500, and then from that third year on they can borrow $7,500 per year. So hopefully by the time they're out of school they haven't borrowed too much. Let's see. And the 1920 interest rate for direct loans was 4.53% for student loans. There's also Parent Plus loans. So to make up the difference in how much it's going to cost them to go to school and how much we can offer them, sometimes we have to like offer Parent Plus loans. So the Parent Plus loans will be on the award letter in most cases, in most schools, and the student has the option to say yes, we want it, or no, we don't. But once they say that, we send notification, and most schools offer it. So all schools who offer it will send notification to the parent and say, your student has said that they want to borrow this money. Do you want to borrow this money? Because it really is the parent's loan, and so they need to go out and do several things to be able to take that money. The parent loan makes up the difference, so we can usually go up to whatever the difference is between how much we offer the student and the cost of attendance. But the parent doesn't have to borrow that much if they don't want to. They can borrow up to what they think it's going to cost to pay the tuition and fees and room and board for that year and nothing else. And the interest rate for that loan was 7.08 in 1920. All right, the other option, after you've gone through all of the federal options, would be to borrow alternative loans. And so alternative loans are out there. I will tell you that most of the time they have a higher interest rate than what the direct loans and the government can offer you. And so it's a really much better idea to try and get your money that way. So to do the FAFSA, there are several different ways that you can go about doing it. So FAFSA on the web is probably the one I would suggest the most, just because you'll be able to see almost immediately what types of aid your student will have available to them. There's also the My Student mobile app, which is almost exactly the same, only it's on their phone. So if you wanted to do the FAFSA that way, you absolutely can. There are paper and PDF versions of the FAFSA. This is the slowest way to do the FAFSA. But if you're going to do it, and some people do, you can print that out and you can either mail it in, or you can actually take it to your financial aid office, and you can either have them mail it in for you, or they can also do the FAA access to CPS online. So the financial aid offices can do this. Most of the time that's the last way that it will get done. And there's also FAFSA on the phone. So if there's no other options, you can call the number for FAFSA on the phone and they will talk you through, ask you all the questions and actually enter the information for the student. So FAFSA on the web. This is what the first page will look like. As you can tell, there's going to be a login or a Start Here button at this point. So when you're starting the FAFSA on the web, you're going to have to set up an FSA ID if you haven't already done that before you can actually log in. There's also the option to log in as the student or as a preparer or the parent. Now this is really handy because they didn't used to actually have this option. It used to just be you logged in or you had to start and do your FSA ID. And so when I used to do the FAFSA with my students or with my sons, what I would do is I would have them do their FAFSA, and then I would go in at the end and I would have to sign in, or I would have to put in my username and password, and at that point it was actually a PIN, to be able to sign it for them. So now what they have done is they have access for the student, and then the parent can go in later and put in their information and sign it for the student without actually having to have the student there with them. Okay. So there's also the My Student Aid mobile app, and you can see that there are all the same options. It's just mobile friendly. Okay, so just like FAFSA on the web, the mobile app information is protected, and it prompts the applicant to create a save key, allowing the completion at a later time. So whenever I would help anybody do this, I would tell them, choose a save key that's really easy to remember. I always picked save. That may not be the best thing to choose, just because it's probably like everybody, if everybody's doing it, then you could, oh, there we go. Okay. And then it's going to ask for a digital signature, and it's going to let you know that the FAFSA was actually completed successfully. And again, it will tell you at the end that the EFC was calculated, and it will let you know kind of where you are and what you should expect. Okay. So the FAFSA information is used to calculate the expected family contribution. Okay. The 2021 FAFSA is available October 1st, 2019. So that is just around the corner. And I always think it's a good idea to get it done as early as possible, because Many colleges have a priority deadline. For Fort Hays State, that's December 1st, but every school has their own, and some schools don't have one, but it's a good idea wherever your student is deciding to go that you know what that priority deadline is, because that will ensure that they are able to be awarded in a timely manner, and you'll know exactly how much your student is able to get at that school. Oh, and by the way, use 2018 tax data when you're filling out the FAFSA, okay? All right, so when you go into the FAFSA, it's going to ask for student demographic data. It's really important that you use legal names here. A lot of times students will have nicknames, or parents will have nicknames that they go by. If you use a nickname, the FAFSA information goes through a place called the CPS, which is the Central Processing System, I think. And this is where they check everything to make sure that the information that you're entering is correct. Now, it goes through several different organizations like the Social Security Administration. It goes through the Department of Defense. It goes through several different areas, and they check these things. And so if you put down the wrong name, even if it's just a nickname, it won't necessarily link up, and so it will come back to us as an error. It won't let us see anything because it will say this person doesn't exist. So it's important to use legal names and the correct Social Security number. I've seen a lot of students that transpose the numbers, and that can really gunk everything up. And so either one of two things has to happen. Either a correction needs to be made to fix that Social Security number, or a new FAFSA has to be done. And so it's really important that those two things happen. And it also will ask for your gender. And here's something that I've seen happen. You have to put the gender that you were born with, and I know that this is kind of a hot topic right now, but if a student has changed their gender or is transgender, and they put the wrong gender down, the government won't allow that FAFSA to go through, because if you were born a male, you have to put that down for selective service reasons. So it's very important. Student eligibility. So some of the things they're going to ask are citizenship. U.S. citizens have a Social Security number, and it is tied to their legal name. Eligible non-citizens will have a Social Security number and an alien registration number. So it's important that all of those things are on the FAFSA so that that can link up when it goes through all of those checks. Their grade level. Now, students who are seniors in high school this year should be putting down for next year that they're going to be a freshman. So a first year, never attended before, even if they were going to college classes while they were in high school. The degree that they're seeking, these choices are associates, bachelors, and they're not going to be going for a master's or a PhD at this point. So you shouldn't be picking either one of those. You shouldn't be picking continuing education. You should be picking either associates or bachelors. And they're also going to ask about foster care. So if the student was ever in foster care, it's after they were 13, that's very important to let them know that, but if they weren't, don't put that down. And that information is really important because that determines whether the student is dependent or independent, some of those things. Okay. So students are able to pick up to 10 colleges that will receive their FAFSA. Now, none of those universities or colleges will actually see each other's information. Only the school that gets it will see the information that they said we wanted to go to this school. There are also housing questions, and this helps to determine the cost of attendance, so it's really important that if your student's going to live at home, they're not putting down that they're going to live on campus, because we will base what their cost of attendance is on that answer. Okay, and those choices are at home or on campus or off campus. Now, the dependency questions are going to be if they were born between January 1st, 1997, if they were a veteran, and veteran in this case is if they served in active duty for, I believe it's like more than one day, but not for training. So they weren't discharged for dishonorable reason. So as long as they were in the military and they had any other discharge besides dishonorable, they can say that they were a veteran. If they're active duty, or if they're married, if they have children or other dependents, if both of their parents are deceased, or if they were in foster care past the age of 13. They could also be considered a dependent ward of the court past the age of 13 if they were in legal guardianship. If they were an emancipated minor, which means they went to court and actually got divorced from their parents, or if they're homeless or at risk of homelessness, and or if they're a graduate student, which I don't think that anybody in here is going to probably qualify for that one. So let's see, the one that I want to talk about mostly is that legal guardianship, because that's been in the news, and it's just really important that we fill those answers out correctly. So if they can answer no to all of those questions, they are dependent. And if they answer yes to any of them, then they're considered an independent student, and that opens them up to some other types of aid or other amounts of aid that they might be able to get. Okay, so parent information on the FAFSA. It's really important for you to know who the parent is, and I think it's one of the biggest questions that parents have, especially if you're divorced or if the parents live together and they've been divorced and they're now back together but they're not remarried. So if a student has parents that live together, then both of those parents' information needs to be on the FAFSA. If the parent is divorced, then the student has to put whichever parent they lived with the most in the last 12 months. And if that parent is remarried, then they have to include the step-parent's information as well. So does that make sense? Everybody got that? Okay. Sorry, I'm not keeping up. All right. So information that you're going to need to have with you to complete the FAFSA, definitely Social Security cards, just because I think a lot of times, especially if the student's filling it out, they may not be as familiar with their Social Security number, and so it's a good idea to have it just so that they can reference that. Taxes from 2018, income information, and benefit summaries, okay? The asset information does not include 401ks or IRA balances, and it does not include the value of your primary residence. That's really important too, because sometimes people own farms and they live on them. And so a lot of times they'll put their farm as an asset, but if they actually live at the farm, they do not have to include that, okay? Untaxed income such as child support received. So this also needs to be on the FAFSA. So if there's anything that you're earning and it's not taxed, we need to know about it. Okay.
What's a benefit summary?
A benefit summary? I'm sorry, where does that say that?
First line, taxes, income info, and benefits summary?
Oh, well, anything that you would have got as benefits. So if you, in the year, collected pensions or any kind of benefit, then you would want to put that information down. It's usually on your taxes, but sometimes you'll need that to reference. Okay, so, sorry, I'm reading. Okay, So it's a really good idea to try to use the IRS data retrieval tool, because that is actually real-time data, and it will prevent you from having to go back and find information to send to the financial aid department. So what happens is, as long as you are filing either head of household and you weren't married, or you're married and filing jointly, you are able to use that data retrieval tool. And if you can use it, please try to use it, because it will pull that information in and it will be accurate information and we won't have to verify it. Now, if that happens, once it pulls in, you won't be able to see what it says. It's just going to show a bunch of X's on those lines, and you won't be able to see what it says. Only the school will. And I think that they did that because there was something that happened and some people were trying to pull in other people's information to see what they made. And so the government said, okay, we're not going to do that anymore, and nobody can actually see it except the people at the school who actually work in the financial aid department. The reason that becomes an issue is because you will have to go back in and put how much money you made in that year. So how much income you had. And if you're married and you're filing jointly, then you're going to have to look on your taxes to see which parent made which amount. And you won't be able to see what the adjusted gross income was for the full year. So you want to have your taxes in front of you and your W-2s so you can figure that information out. Okay. The IRS data retrieval tool will not work for families who do not have a Social Security number. So if both parents don't have a Social Security number, it won't pull in. If you're married but you file taxes separately. So if that occurs, you won't be able to use it. Or if you were divorced in that year, it won't allow you to use it as well. It's gonna say this doesn't match what we have, and so it just won't let you. All right. So the IRS data retrieval tool, this just shows you the people who can't use it. So, and this is very small. I'm sorry, my eyes are getting bad. So they didn't indicate on the FAFSA that a tax return was completed. They married after January 2019 or later. The first 3 digits of the Social Security number are 666, and the reason that's important is because it's somebody who comes from, I think, like the Marshall Islands or one of those countries. They filed a non-US tax return. They married and filed as head of household or filed separate returns. Neither married parent entered a valid Social Security number, and non-married parent or both married parents entered all zeros for their Social Security number. And those parents are people who don't have a Social Security number. So if you enter all zeros, that is what you're supposed to do if you do not have a Social Security number. All right. There are several errors that occur multiple times, and we see them a lot. So again, like I said, Social Security numbers, a lot of times they transpose a number, and that creates problems. Divorced and remarried parental information. So if the parents are divorced and they're remarried and the mom only puts her own information in and doesn't enter her husband's information, that is incorrect. Income earned by parents or step-parents, so sometimes they won't put the correct income in. Like I said, you won't be able to see that AGI, so it's going to be really important to have those documents. U.S. income taxes paid. The household size. Sometimes you'll forget a student, like if your child is under 24 and they're still in school, they are still considered part of the household, and sometimes parents will forget to put those students on. Number of household members in college. Real estate and investment net worth. So again, this could be a mistake, like I added my family farm and I live there, or it could be I forgot to include a business in my real estate and investment net worth. And what assets to include. So those are all things. If you make that mistake, you can make corrections at FAFSA.gov. Or you can make when you do the FAFSA, you'll actually in the mail get an SAR, which is the student aid report. And you can make those corrections on that student aid report and then sign it and mail it back in. So, FSA ID, to be able to sign your FAFSA on the web or through the student mobile app, you will have to have an FSA ID. It used to be a PIN, so it was like a 4-digit number. And I used to tell people, oh, you're gonna be using that forever. You know, never lose that 4-digit PIN. And then like the next year they said, oh, hey, we're changing it. So, so the FSA ID is a username and a password. Both the parent and the student need to have one, and you need to use 2 different email addresses to be able to do this. It used to be you could do all the pins on one email address, and mom just created all of her kids' pins and could do everything, and now the government is saying, well, we want the student to actually be responsible for their own FSA ID, and we want mom to be responsible for her own. And so that is why they did that. Okay, and this is where you would actually go, that fsaid.ed.gov, to be able to create that. Okay, so after you file, a summary of that application will go to the student. It will get mailed to them. They can also access it on the web. So there's a couple of places, if they did their FSA or if they did their FAFSA on the web or on the mobile app, they can see it online. The schools that the student put on their FAFSA will also get a report, and that's called an ICER. So it stands for something, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because I can't remember exactly. It's like, never mind. If the school is going to require further information or documentation, they need to contact the student directly, okay? So they will. They'll send an email, or they'll send some kind of a letter or something. And so you want to know what your school is going to expect of you and what way they're going to actually interact with the student. And also know that as the parent, most schools are going to make the student sign a FERPA. So a FERPA is the Family Educational Right to Privacy Act. And basically it just says that the student has the right to not share their information. So if you, as the parent, want to know something, then your student would have needed to sign a FERPA to allow us to have access to discuss anything with you. Okay, so the next thing is you were going to want to watch for the award notification. Most schools will either mail it or email it to the student. And so again, that's why it's important to know how your school is going to keep in contact with you, because some schools will send it in a letter and you might throw it under a pile, or it may be sent as an email and you just don't see it for a very long time. They don't usually begin awarding for 2021 until late December. There are schools who will do it as early as October 1st, but that's not very typical. And then some schools will do it later, so it's a good idea to know when you're going to be expecting it too. Okay, so there are special circumstances. Sorry, I'm trying to change this. For students who get their award letters and maybe they can't necessarily afford to go to school. And the reasons can be varied, but if there was a change in employment status, if there are unusual medical expenses not covered by insurance, or there's a change in marital status after the FAFSA was completed, then those are all things that you can share with the school, and they'll be able to help you perhaps get a professional judgment, and that may actually open up some more money for the student. Okay, if you think that you qualify for this, you're going to need to send written information and documentation to the financial aid office at each school. And the college will review and request additional information if they need it. Decisions are final and cannot be appealed by the U.S. Department of Education. So if a student feels like they were told they couldn't have a professional judgment for a certain reason, they can't go, there's nowhere for them to go and say, I don't agree with this. So whatever the financial aid decision is final. Okay, so these are some of the possible circumstances. So unusual uncovered medical or dental expenses, parent or spouse death, loss of employment, divorce, and sometimes the student can't obtain parent information. So it's also really a good idea for students to know what they need to be able to do to keep their financial aid. So each school has a set of expectations that have to be at least as stringent as the academic plan, and the government actually has kind of a guideline for you. So time frame. They have to complete their degree within 150% of the time that it takes to normally receive a degree. Now, I know that makes absolutely no sense, but if it takes 120 credits to get a degree, then you would have to complete the degree within 180. The grade point average, most of the time, by the time they're in their senior year, has to be a 2.0. And their PACE, they have to complete 67% completion rate. So that means if they took 15 credits, they have to pass at least 12 to be eligible for financial aid the next semester. Now, they can go on to warning. Some schools have a warning semester and they wouldn't have to appeal, but if they didn't meet it the next semester, then they would need to, they would be on probation and they'd have to appeal. So, scholarships. So scholarships are considered gift aid and they're similar to grants. Some of them are restricted on what they can pay for, so sometimes it's just direct costs, and sometimes there are enrollment restrictions. So a lot of times they'll say that the student has to be at least full-time, and they have to be and they have to only pay for tuition and fees or something. Some of them are unrestricted and they can pay for whatever, but a lot of times they'll have a restriction on them. And they can come from multiple sources, so institutions, organizations, employers, or and that list grows all the time. And where you can find them, a lot of times you want to check your institution first because they probably have the most scholarships available. I would go onto the website and just search on their search bar for scholarships, and that should take you to the scholarship page and access to their application. A lot of times they will have some kind of a deadline, so it's important to know what those deadlines are. You need to know when to apply, and you need to also know, is it merit-based or need-based, because those will have different eligibility requirements. And it's a good idea to know if it's renewable or not. So sometimes they'll only give it for a year, and sometimes they'll give it for all 4 years. If you are looking for state aid, you can go to the Kansas Board of Regents website, and they have several different types of scholarships available. All of the programs are included on this page. Now, not all schools will offer all of those programs, so it's a good idea also to know what each school offers. So where do you go from here? You're going to need to obtain and review admission and financial aid website and materials for each school to which you're applying. You need to meet all application deadlines. Complete the FAFSA and other application materials and submit all requested follow-up documents. And it's a good idea to also investigate other sources of aid that might be out there. So, all right. Do I have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
So if I already have like the FSA ID for an older child, I can use that same ID. but
Correct.
a different one for the younger?
Right, exactly. So if you've set one up in the last several years, it wasn't a PIN, I'm guessing. It's the username and the password. You never saw the PIN. Yeah, those were much easier. But yes, you have yours and your older child has theirs, and you'll need to set one up for the younger child. But you would continue to use the same one that you've always used. Yep. And if you forget, I know there's a way to get it. It can be very complicated sometimes, but hopefully you wrote it down. Yeah, I think that since they've done the FSA ID, that's the thing that happens the most with it, is that people just forget to write it down and they forget what it is. And then trying to get it, you have to call in and they ask you a million questions. So, but yeah.
So can we do, like, to get the ID, can we do that at any time?
Yes, you can do that now and get that set up. So, and then like I said, write it down, keep it somewhere. I always kept mine with my taxes so that each year, because you have to pull those back out each year when you redo the FAFSA, because you're only going to use it a couple of times during the year, and so it's a good idea to keep it right there in that file so that you're not having to pull it back out. Yes, ma'am.
You talked about the FAFSA you can access up to 10 schools. What if that affects the students' living arrangement?
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. At most of those schools, will they be living on campus, and then maybe one or two they'll be living off campus? And so what I would do is just say off campus and then call those schools individually and tell them that, you know, for their school they would be living off campus. Did I say that right? Say on campus and then call those schools the two or whatever and say, yeah, sorry, I think I said that wrong. Say on campus, because if most of the schools are going to be living on campus, say on campus. But if they only have like one or two that they would live off campus, like if you live in Hayes and you're coming in, one of those schools is the technical college, then you would call them and say, my student would be living off campus if they were, if we decide to come there. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
What if you don't know where your child is? You know, if there's sports potential? Can you do a general?
Well, I guess I don't, a general for what?
Like just apply for, like, or does it have to be school specific?
Yes, you're going to have to put a school down for it to go to that school. You can't just do a FAFSA, and if you don't put an institution, it won't go anywhere. Does that make sense? It won't just go to every school. It will just go nowhere.
Well, I mean,
Yeah. No, I know. But yeah, you would have to put something. So yeah.
You can go in and add schools later.
Yes, absolutely. So you could go in and you could start it and because you don't have to submit it until you're ready, and then you could go back in and make a correction. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
When can we start pulling out the FAFSA?
October 1. October 1 is when it opens, and the sooner you can get it done, the sooner it gets to the school, and the sooner they can get started on making sure that student has their award letter. Okay, well, if there are other questions, Angela and I will be here for just a little bit, and you can absolutely come up and talk to us. I know it always puts people on the spot when I ask for questions. So thank you again for coming out, and have a great night.